and sit down.
Hey guys, check out my new whip. This is my new Fiber Ride-On Unicorn, and I loves it. It comes complete with rainbow reins, a magic glowing horn that might not work, a nice pink brush to comb its pretty hair, and an attitude that just screams, "Look at me, I know." I think first order of business though is to give this unicorn a name. Whilst I can't make out any obvious gender, as we know by modern day society, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I think I'm going to go with what feels right. Larry. So with the naming ceremony now over, it's time to bring Larry inside and find out what makes him tick. So as I start to disassemble Larry, I find I am struck by a pang of guilt at the thought of removing his dignity on camera. However, unfortunately this is a necessary step in order to find out what kind of power source and what kind of motors we are using in order to better understand where improvements can be made. I don't want Larry to be just like every other unicorn. I want Larry to be the king of unicorns. Whilst on our travels through Larry's anatomy, we come across this mysterious little motor. It transpires this is the source of Larry's power, allowing him to reach the blistering speeds of 1.86 miles per hour. However, whilst I am over the recommended age by at least a few days, it's arguable that I might be slightly over the recommended weight. In proper units, that's just under 30 kilograms. Must be because I've still got my clothes on. Well, regardless of whether or not it's a clothing issue or whether it's the fact that these scales could be faulty, it is still true that at Larry's current level he does require a bit of help in order to get going to his top speed. This is not acceptable. As the king of unicorns, Larry must also be the fastest. Hence the reason we've been disassembling him. In a nutshell, he needs more power. I did genuinely toy with the idea of buying and installing a pit bike engine in him, but I think it's probably a little bit too big. I then found these little two-stroke bike engines which you can use to convert your bike into a mini motorbike. However, the downside of these is that you have to drop the clutch whilst pedalling and basically a bump start in order to get it going, which obviously isn't going to be an option in Larry. And even if I did manage to install a pull or electric start, I just worry that the heat from the engine would melt a hole in his backside. But then as I lay outside one night contemplating the takeaway pizza I'd just eaten and whether or not it was going to repeat on me, I found myself staring up at the cloudy, starless, noise-polluted sky, and I remembered that global warming was a thing. And because it's a thing, many, many days ago people invented bicycles which are renowned for being environmentally friendly. But because pedalling sucks and humans are lazy, we then decided to make them less environmentally friendly again by strapping a lithium-ion battery to them and a motor, thus creating the eBike. And with that, I found my prayers were answered, as you can readily buy these conversion kits online. So having placed my order and waited the week for it to arrive, I finally got the ding-dong at the door. Alright. Cheers, thank you. Turns out the kit comes in two boxes, one for the battery and one for the motor. Guess which one this is?
Ah, there we go.
I was initially worried about how I was going to fit all of this inside Larry, but looking at it, it doesn't look too bad. But then I saw the size of the battery, which looks a lot like Robocop's phallus. I have no idea where I'm going to store this for now. And here I come across my first real conundrum, which is that I discover I know nothing about electric motors. But whilst this kit is quite advanced if you're wanting to make an e-bike, for me all I really need is the throttle, which I'm connecting here to the motor and the motor to the battery, and that's pretty much all we should need, really. And with that, it's time to give this thing a test. We turn on our little microcomputer doodah, and we push the throttle, and this is the blistering speed we have. Okay, granted, the battery's pretty much flat, so this is not how fast it will go, I hope. So moving on with the project, I attach the sprocket, I give Larry some plastic surgery, drill a few holes, demonstrate that I can use a pen. This is a move I have a lot of experience with, and basically we're just making room inside him in order to finally fit up the electric motor. And from there, it's time to start working on the rest of the bodywork. So I need to chop this section of the leg off in order to make it fit inside that square. Easy enough, just like that. On the other side of Larry, I attached this little bracket that came with the bike, and I put this little bolt going through into the motor housing just to secure it in place, as you can see by this jiggle test, which is obviously very well renowned. And then to support the axle all the way through, I decided to make a little bracket out of some scrap steel. So I clean it up a little bit, drill a couple of holes, and bolt it to the bodywork. And that seemed to work quite well. And then to give some structural support to the body, I chopped out a few pieces of steel and just held them in place with gravity, and then I surrounded the entire thing with some expanding foam. This was rather messy, but it seemed to be effective, so I repeated these steps for both of the back legs as well. And with that, it was time to move on to the reassembly of the front half of Larry, and to make sure that his steering was working, which it is. I found a bit of time to make Larry beautiful, and we finally got around to running the chain around the sprocket. Can't do much with this for now, but it's in place for later. Then we moved on to the wiring, which we fed through his backside and through the saddle, which we install in place with our beautiful rainbow Velcro, leaving Larry looking mighty fine. And then we reinsert the brush because Larry needs to accessorize, and it also helps to hide this power cable quite nicely. And with that, that's pretty much the body done. I must admit, around this time I start to feel slightly nervous as to how well Larry's actually going to work. If only I had something magical to remove my doubts. I also decided to use some duct tape to do that weird pretentious thing horsey people do with their horses in order to keep the tail away from the chain. And then moving on to the steering, the handlebars unfortunately are not going to be reused, so I set about making a new bracket out of some pine, and then roughly grinding it into a cylinder shape using my belt grinder. Now you might be thinking, Phil, haven't you got a lathe? And the simple answer is yes I do, but I can't be bothered to tidy up my workbench in order to get it out, so yeah. However, this next step should definitely have been done with a lathe. It was then just a case of sawing the thing to the right length and inserting it into the bracket, attaching the top part and bolting the thing down. And then with the wiring run through, it was time to reattach the head. I then inserted a stainless steel tube through the wood to act as my handlebars and wrapped it in some pretty pink tape, before then attaching the various components to the handlebars. Cut to a few days later, and the sprocket I ordered arrived, but unfortunately it was a little bit too wide, so I ended up grinding it down slightly on the belt grinder before sliding it onto the axle. It was then just a case of adjusting the chain to the correct length before fitting the whole thing up together and making sure it was tracking correctly, which it was. I then drilled and tapped a hole through the sprocket and attached it with a grub screw to the axle to ensure that the wheels also now turned, and the first test was a success. I also added this little iron bar at the back just to add some rigidity between the legs. And from there it was time to give this thing its first real test with me on board, and it didn't go very well. It transpires that there's too much slack in the chain, and with the inability to tension it, as we've got a fixed axle, it meant that the chain just kept sliding off the sprocket and running around itself. In order to solve this problem, I ended up grinding off this little semicircle of steel and welding it to the bar to act as a sort of makeshift tensioner. This did make it a lot better, but it was still having problems, although my neighbours still seemed to enjoy it. I ended up having to get a little bit radical with this thing, and I basically built like a little chain rail in order to guide it onto the sprocket. And with that, this thing worked so much better immediately.
Hell yes.
Well, having just jerked off a unicorn's head on camera, I now feel I can truly confide in you guys. I was genuinely hoping to get Larry going around 20 miles an hour, but let's see how fast we actually got him going. So as it turns out, Larry is crap. King of unicorns my arse. But I guess I don't really know what I was expecting with this. I mean, the motor's supposed to work with bicycle wheels, and I elected to keep his rubbish pink ones because I like them. So realistically, he was never getting up to those promised speeds. And honestly, I think I'm actually glad because he speed wobbles something terrible even at 5 miles an hour. But regardless, I don't like the idea of Larry just sitting in my workshop collecting dust. I want to find some kind of real-world use for him.
Larry 1, go ahead.
Dear Larry 1, are you free to respond to a helicopter crash into a hospital?
Roger that. I'm on my way. Let's ride.
Sake. Oh no!
Guys, I gotta be honest, Larry is arguably not the king of unicorns. But I still quite like him. I like the way how his chain slips, making him sound like a moped backfiring. I like the stupid stars he's got painted into his eyes. I like the way he comes to a dead stop when you hit any tiny little obstacle. And I like the way he's got a turning circle of a canoe. So in closing, guys, Larry may not be the best unicorn in the world, but he's my favourite. Okie dokie, guys, something a little bit different for you this time. I'm wanting to sort of branch out a little bit to do more than just blacksmithing and maybe make it more of a PJT projects kind of channel. Let me know what you think of the style of this one, because obviously it's a little bit different from my normal stuff. And if you liked it, all the usual YouTube blah blah blah, which I can't be bothered to run through. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.